Wait, what's that? What's my gender identity? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Can we just take a quick moment to appreciate and acknowledge the fact that I look like the love child between Blair Waldorf and Captain Jack Sparrow, and I am absolutely loving it. Hello, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for being here. Let's dive into the amazing, confusing, beautiful world of gender identity. I've got my tendrils, I've got my horrible manicure, and I've got my notes. We're ready to rock and roll. The very first thing I want to start with is just an acknowledgement to put it out there that gender is confusing. It's a very personal, internal experience, gender identity, which is different than gender expression, which we will get into soon. But gender identity is hard to talk about sometimes because, first of all, there's a lot of words. Second of all, it's hard to understand what people's experience of their gender identity is. We only have our own internal sense of gender identity, so I want to recognize that. I want to put that out there so that people don't feel bad for not fully understanding it. This is not a code to crack. This video is not going to explain everything and you'll be left feeling oh, okay, I get it now. That totally makes sense. No, this is sharing my experience in the hopes that it either affirms some other people's experiences. You hopefully will learn something, but it's not going to be knowledge in the way where now you know, and then you carry on knowing about gender identity, boom, done. As nice as that would be, not realistic. So the first thing that I want to get into is that difference between gender identity and gender expression. So gender identity is that internal little voice, that internal sense of knowing. It's just what your gender is. There's not a great way to describe it other than to ask you, what is your gender? For people out there, let's say you're a woman, it's that part of you that just knows that you're a woman. And for some people, they feel like a woman. For some people, they might feel like a man. For some people, they might feel like another gender identity, let's say non-binary. So there are certain gender identities that we are a little bit more familiar with, and then other ones that we might have heard of less. But each gender identity word is attempting to describe that experience, that internal knowingness, versus gender expression or self-expression is just the way that we express ourselves. It is what we wear, it is how we are in the world, it is more visible to the outside world than gender identity. There's not a direct correlation. They're not the same thing, meaning that two women might not dress exactly the same or express their gender in exactly the same way, right? That's kind of obvious. So gender expression and the way that we express ourselves might be related to our gender identities, for some people more than others, but it also doesn't have to be. People can wear whatever they want, and that doesn't inform what their gender is. But there absolutely can be very important connections for people in terms of their expression and their genders. The next thing I want to introduce is the idea of gender words. So I just named a few: men, women, non-binary. There's more. There's bigender and trigender and agender. There's a lot of words that we can use to describe our experience of gender. However, I want to point out that there is a difference between someone's gender identity and the word that they use to describe it. And I want to make that distinction because it's important in understanding what my gender identity is, which I will get to briefly. So language, as it operates, it tries to capture something, right? We call a banana a banana. We know that the word banana is just a word. It's a word that we it triggers in our brain. Oh yeah, that yellow thing over there. But the word banana is not the exact same thing as the banana itself. So we have to appreciate that language does its best to try and describe things, but gender is a lot more complicated to describe with words than just a banana that's sitting right there, right? It's kind of how we describe feelings. It's not always immediately obvious to us what our feelings are and how to describe them, especially not with just one word, right? We don't usually just feel happy or usually just feel sad. It's a blend of a lot of different things at once. We don't always feel like we can just produce the words to describe how we're feeling. And so we have to afford that same flexibility when it comes to gender language. So words like women and man and non-binary, they don't have a fixed definition that means the exact same thing for every different person, right? These are words that we have as tools that people can use to help describe themselves. but it doesn't mean that two people that are non-binary are exactly going to be non-binary in the same way. It doesn't mean that somebody always has an answer for what their gender is, right? Language is imperfect, so we should let people use whatever language works best for them. The goal really isn't to memorize a list of words and then feel like you know exactly what each of the gender words means. It's more so to be respectful for the individual ways that people use these words to describe themselves. So if you are curious, I definitely recommend familiarizing yourself with the more common gender terms. However, when you're doing that learning, there needs to be a lot of built-in flexibility so that if you meet two people who are agender, that can mean really different things because they're two very different people who might have experiences of gender in different ways. They just happen to resonate with the same gender term. So let there be flexibility in this process of learning about what gender is. With that all being said, what is my gender? Drum roll, please. It's a little bit unsatisfying. I don't have just one word that perfectly captures how I experience my gender. The one that feels best for me right now is genderqueer. Genderqueer, similar to non-binary, can be used as either an identity, like a thing itself to be, like I am genderqueer, I am non-binary. It can also refer to a lot of different gender identities. So you could talk about non-binary identities, the umbrella, meaning things like bigender, trigender, agender, etc., gender fluid. So the way that I use genderqueer, it's very open-ended. It's not just one specific thing that I could easily define. Underneath the genderqueer umbrella, for me, things like non-binary and gender fluid and gender non-conforming, these things resonate for me in a very similar way. To other people, those might be super different, and we always have to be mindful that the way that I interpret and use gender words to describe myself might be so different than somebody else. So if somebody else is non-binary or genderqueer, just because those two kind of mean the same thing for me, doesn't mean that they will for other people. So that is so important to recognize. And a part of my own genderqueer experience is not really minding when people call me a boy, when people refer to me as Mr. or Sir. My pronouns are he, him. I wear masculine traditional boy clothes pretty regularly, and I don't mind that per se. It's not that that is what's most comfortable for me. I need a lot of feminine expression. I need a lot of feeling that energy and that kind of confidence that I feel when I put on wigs and makeup and the more feminine things like I am right now. But I also feel comfortable wearing boy clothes, as they might be called. And that for me really was confusing as I was /am, this is a ever-going process, trying to figure out what my gender identity is, because I thought that in order to be genderqueer or non-binary or anything other than cisgendered, I thought you had to experience dysphoria or want to use neutral pronouns or really get uncomfortable when people would call you by certain things. So I thought, I was okay, well I guess maybe then I'm not genderqueer. But what I've come to and what I've learned from others and what I've allowed myself to believe is that there's no prerequisite for any gender term or another. To be genderqueer, you don't need to feel anything other than the fact that genderqueer resonates for you. So for me, I give myself a lot of flexibility in terms of I can feel masculine, I can feel feminine, I can feel anything, and I don't have to read too much into it. Genderqueer for me just feels comfortable because it's so open-ended and flexible, and I love that. It makes me feel really good. But at the same time, I have to acknowledge that it is a privilege that I don't feel uncomfortable when people call me a man. I don't feel like I'm ever misgendered because I don't have a very strong emotional attachment to any of the gender terms or pronouns or another. People call me she, people call me they actually a lot. I get assumed that I use they pronouns. And for me, it doesn't really make me feel uncomfortable. However, that doesn't mean then, knowing that about me, again, that you can go and assume that's true for all genderqueer people. Oh, they don't care. We always have to respect people's pronouns. We should always offer up our own pronouns and recognize that people have their own experience of language and of gender. And I still, even though I don't feel uncomfortable by being called gentleman or whatever, I really believe that we need to be doing a better job at de-gendering the language that we use. So instead of calling a room, ladies and gentlemen, we should call it, hello everybody, or good evening folks, so that nobody feels uncomfortable. It's not to erase the experience of people who are ladies and gentlemen, it's to make it inclusive for everyone. So even though that's not a personal experience of gender for me, that's absolutely where my beliefs are. It's absolutely where I think that we need to be heading. For so long, I felt so confused and I really questioned what is my gender and how do I describe it, etc. And I still do that, definitely to a degree. But I heard it said really well by someone, I wish I could remember who, that some people feel happy when they find the right word to describe themselves with, and other people feel happy when they stop looking. And that resonates so true for me. It's like, oh yes, of course, like I don't need to find the exact perfect right combination of words to describe myself with. I'm glad that I feel comfortable doing what I do and presenting how I do and just not questioning too much how to call it, what to call it. I'm just me, I'm just Brendan. This all makes sense to me in a really simple way. It gets complicated when I start trying to name it, when I start attaching labels to it or feeling like I should. That's when it becomes like a downer and it feels like, oh gosh, just like the weight of the world demanding me to call myself one thing or another, to be able to conjure up the perfect word to describe myself to other people. I don't have that. Maybe one day I'll figure out like the perfect word for me, but right now I feel most comfortable in a state of a little bit of ambiguity. So what I really want to see in all of us, and this is a learning moment, is that when it really comes down to it, gender identity itself matters, yes, but it isn't necessary in order to be respectful. You don't need to know or understand someone's gender in order to respect them, in order to be attracted to them, in order to have a conversation with them, be a friend to them, be a lover to them, etc. We don't need to know what every single person's exact gender identity is and their experience with that in order to just treat them like a human being, like we all are, which is not to say that gender identity and the words aren't important. They absolutely are. We need to be respecting people's pronouns, respecting people's names, and calling people by how they want to be called. But we also need to divest from feeling like we need to like figure it out, or that gender is this really confusing thing that is new and like all these new genders are popping up and I just don't get it. Like, people are just being themselves. People are just finding ways to be comfortable in the world. I think that's something we can all resonate with, right? Like, none of us exist in a world where everything just makes perfect sense all the time. Like, we all feel confused about things. We all wonder and grapple with things that we experience internally, right? So let's just let people breathe and have some breathing room to be themselves and not get so caught up in the exact nitty-gritty particulars. This is a great exercise. Like, look inside, ask yourself, what gender am I? And like, how do I know? How did I get there? How would I define it if I was asked to or expected to? Let's say to somebody who had never heard of that gender before. If you're a man, how would you describe what being a man is to you, to somebody who had never heard of that? Like, would that feel frustrating? Would that feel invalidating? Would you just want to be like, it's just what I am? So do some of that internal exploration. And I think what we'll hopefully come to and realize is that gender is not just confusing for people like non-binary folks and the genderqueer identities that might seem like newer. Gender itself is very self-constructed. If we asked a billion women what it meant for them to be a woman, we wouldn't get exactly the same answer, right? Like, the categories of gender only really seem to be confusing when we investigate them through the lens of non-binary, which has gotten a lot more attention recently, thank goodness. But when we look at categories that we think we know, like men and women, we can recognize that there's not a fixed way that we understand these identities. We have assumptions about them, we have gender norms, we're trained, we have these lenses over our eyes and our ears to be able to filter the world into like men, women, based on characteristics. But when we actually get into the definition of men and women, we can realize that things are very confusing all around. There's like this presumption that we all are on the same page about what these things are, but no one is experiencing being a man in the exact same way. No one is experiencing being a woman in the exact same way. And no one experiences being gender fluid, non-binary, any other genderqueer experience in the same way. can't deny there is privilege with me and my gender identity. I am very privileged environmentally, growing up in San Francisco, familially with a very accepting family, and then the body that I live in is very privileged, so that when I wear gender bendy things, when people see me in this, because I'm thin and white, it looks chic to them and it looks like, ooh, wow, cute. Whereas somebody else who has a different body, they will face a lot more harassment, they will face a lot more pressure to conform. So I'm really lucky in that sense, and we need to be making more strides for this freedom of flexibility to be available to everyone, so that people can just celebrate life and adorn their body with color and feel like they have total freedom to express themselves. Because me wearing this wig, them wearing that lipstick, her wearing that suit, etc., it's not hurting anyone. People just want to feel like themselves. So let's start letting that happen, right? Right? Right. Okay, that's the end of today's video. Thank you so much for being here. I hope that you are... Actually, I don't know if I hope that you're less confused. Maybe I hope that you're more confused. I think confusion is something good that we need to lean more into. Acknowledging like the beauty in confusion, the fluidity in confusion. I love gender confused is actually a term that I have coined myself, I think. And that really resonates for me. It's like gender confused. It's this beautiful, great confusion where I can just let myself be confused. It doesn't have to be something I'm battling against. So I wish you all gender confusion and gender euphoria and gender exploration. So, mwah. Let me know if you have respectful comments down there in the bottom little comment section, and I will get back to you all, I promise. And I will see you in the next video. All right, bye everybody. Mwah, 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 mwah. Ooh, yeah, eh. Okay, peace.